The camping trip was supposed to be a beautiful memory. The crackling of the campfire, the smell of pine, and the easy laughter of the four of us, Alex, Mike, Nate, and Lily, echoed through the forest. We were a close-knit group, friends since elementary school, and this trip was meant to be a final send-off before we all headed to different colleges. That evening, we sat gathered around the fire, swapping casual jokes and harmless stories. The night wind began to pick up, bringing with it a cool air and a sense of unease. Nate, the most reckless among us, suddenly stopped talking. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Nate asked, his eyes scanning the pitch-black woods. We fell silent, listening. All we could hear was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Mike, the most cynical of the group, was quick to scoff. "Hear what? It's just the wind, man. Don't be so dramatic." But Nate shook his head, his face more serious than I'd ever seen it. Number, it wasn't the wind. It was a whisper. None of us believed him. This forest was known to be isolated miles away from any town, but Nate's story had changed the mood. Lily, our quiet friend, hugged her knees and moved closer to the fire. "Don't talk about ghosts, please. I'm getting scared." "Ghosts? There's no such thing." Mike laughed. "Just some old folk tales. We probably pitched our tents on some ancient burial ground or something." "Do you really believe that?" Nate asked Mike, his voice low. "They say on the west side of this forest, there's an old wooden cabin. A family disappeared from there over 30 years ago." I felt a pang of unease as I listened, but teenage curiosity is a powerful thing. I looked from Nate to Mike, and finally to Lily, whose face had gone pale. "That cabin, is it still standing?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Nate nodded, a smile returning to his face, but it was a mischievous one now. "They say no one ever goes near it. A few people have tried, but they never came back with any stories." Mike sighed, stood up, and clapped Nate on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get some sleep. We have a big hike tomorrow." But Nate shook his head. We're going there tomorrow. We're going to explore it, not just hike." I knew Nate's personality. He lived for an adrenaline rush, and his challenge had sparked our curiosity. Lily shook her head firmly. "I'm not going. I'm too scared." "Then you'll just stay here by yourself," Nate teased, a hint of recklessness in his voice. "We'll be back in the morning to tell you all about it." In the end, curiosity and peer pressure won out. We decided we would go. Lily agreed to stay behind, but the look in her eyes was pure anxiety. That night, squeezed into our small tent, I couldn't fall asleep. My mind kept replaying the image of that abandoned cabin and the story of the missing family. The next morning, with the fog still thick on the ground, the three of us, Nate, Mike, and I, began our journey. We followed a small trail that Nate had found on an old map. The path grew narrower and the trees on either side became denser. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, casting dim, flickering shadows on the ground. The air grew damp and cold. The chirping of insects faded, replaced by an eerie silence. "Hey man, you sure this is the right way?" Mike asked, his voice laced with doubt. "Totally," Nate replied, but his usual confidence was gone. After almost an hour of walking, we came to a clearing, and there it was, a small wooden cabin. It wasn't what I had imagined. It wasn't huge or imposing. It was small, as if it had been there for 100 years, slowly rotting away. Moss covered its walls, and the windows were cracked and stained. "This is it," Nate whispered. We approached the cabin. It had a look that was both old and terrifying. There were no signs of life. A few dry branches tapped softly against the walls. Mike, mustering his courage, pushed the door. It was unlocked. It creaked open, as if it had been left ajar for decades. Inside, the cabin reeked of mold and decay. Dust lay thick on every surface, creating a grey haze. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, illuminating particles of dust suspended in the air. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Mike and Nate, despite their bravado, seemed equally unnerved. The silence inside was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a lingering presence, a quiet whisper that clung to the air. It felt less like a forgotten place and more like a tomb. "Look," Mike said, pointing to the floor. A section of the wooden planks was slightly raised. Nate, with a thrill-seeker's curiosity, pried it open. Inside was not what we expected. Not a treasure chest or a dusty heirloom, but a small, worn-out notebook. It was a child's notebook, its cover faded, its pages yellowed. Nate opened it. The pages were filled with strange, childish drawings. Most were simple stick figures and landscapes, but some were off. There was a recurring figure, a tall, gaunt character with limbs too long for its body. It always stood in the background, half hidden by a tree or a house. But the most unsettling thing was its face, a blank, expressionless oval with two hollow black holes for eyes. On every page, the child had given it the same name, scrawled in unsteady handwriting, "The Silent Friend." "Creepy," Mike mumbled, but he was staring at the drawing, a hint of genuine fear in his eyes. "It's just a kid's drawing, man," Nate said, but he quickly turned the page. On the next page, the drawings became frantic. The stick figures were running, their faces distorted with fear. The silent friend was no longer in the background. It was right behind them, its long arms reaching out. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. "This isn't just a drawing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This is a cry for help." We flipped through the remaining pages, the drawings becoming more and more chaotic. Then we reached the final page, which had been torn from the notebook. It was just a small piece of paper, but the message scrawled on it was clear, as if written in a moment of sheer terror. "He doesn't like it when you laugh at him." We stared at the message, the gravity of the words sinking in, the playful dare, the casual exploration. It had all turned sinister. Nate, without a word, stuffed the notebook into his backpack. We didn't need to discuss it. We all felt the same thing. We had to get out of there. The cabin suddenly felt like a cage, and the air around us was heavy, suffocating. We ran out, bursting into the open air of the forest, which now felt different. The friendly trees and soft ground were gone, replaced by a maze of shadows and twisting roots. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. We didn't stop until we were back at the campsite, our own laughter from the previous night feeling like a mocking echo. We tried to talk, to rationalize what we had seen, but the fear was now a silent presence among us, a fifth member of our group. We had entered that cabin full of youthful bravado. We had left it marked. I lay in my tent that night, unable to sleep, my mind consumed by the image of the silent friend. The last thing I heard before my exhaustion finally won was a faint creaking sound, not from a tree branch or a tent pole, but from a spot just outside my tent, as if someone or something was slowly rocking back and forth. The camping trip ended, but the shadows we brought back with us didn't. Back in my room, The familiar posters and books felt wrong. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, a trick of the mind. I shoved the notebook into the back of my closet, beneath a pile of clothes, hoping to bury the memory with it. For the first few days, nothing happened. We all tried to act normal. Mike went back to his sarcastic quips, pretending the whole cabin incident was a silly dare. Nate was unusually quiet, his bravado replaced by a restless energy. Lily stopped answering her phone. I tried to call her, but her mum would say she was resting. It was clear the silent fear had fractured our group. The first sign came 3 nights later. It was a faint scratching sound coming from inside my closet. It was a rhythmic, gentle scrape, like a nail dragging against wood. It went on for minutes, stopping the moment I sat up in bed. I told myself it was just a branch scratching against the window. But the closet was on the inner wall. The next night, it happened again. Then came the whispers, so soft I could barely hear them. A low, constant murmur from the darkness beneath my desk. I lay awake for hours, my heart pounding, straining to make out the words. All I could ever discern was my own name, spoken with a voice that was neither male nor female, but something else entirely, like the sound of rustling leaves, dried out and brittle. I finally managed to corner Mike at school. I told him about the sounds. He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Dude, you're freaking yourself out. It's nothing, just a bad dream." But even as he said it, his eyes darted around the hallway as if looking for something in the shadows. His denial was so fierce, I knew he was hiding something. The haunting soon became personal for each of us. Mike was the next to crack. He called me in a panic, his voice a frantic whisper. "Alex, listen to me. I'm not crazy. I swear to God, I'm not." He told me about his guitar. He'd left it on its stand in his room, but when he came back from a run, he found it lying on his bed, the fretboard facing up. On the polished wood, someone had drawn a small, crude stick figure. The eyes were hollow black holes. It was a perfect copy of a drawing from the notebook. He tried to wipe it off, but the drawing refused to budge. He'd even tried to use a cleaning spray, but it was like it was burned into the wood. His denial was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Lily's fear was different. It was subtle, insidious. She called me a few days later, her voice thin and distant. She told me she felt a presence in her house. She would catch glimpses of a tall, gaunt shadow in the hallway or in the reflection of her dark TV screen. The shadow was always still, always watching her. One night, she was brushing her teeth, and in the mirror behind her own reflection, she saw it. Not just a shadow, but a figure, its arms too long, its head tilted. It stood there for a split second before vanishing. Lily threw the toothbrush across the bathroom, her hands trembling. The notebook, which I had tried to bury, began to resurface. I would wake up to find it on my nightstand. I'd put it under my bed, and it would be on my pillow the next morning. It was as if the book itself was a compass, always pointing to a direction that promised only dread. I tried to burn it, but the pages refused to catch fire. The matches flared and then died, leaving a faint scent of sulfur that filled the air. I tried to rip it, but the paper felt like leather, impossible to tear. I finally understood. We couldn't destroy it. It was a part of something else, something bigger. The scariest part was when we discovered a pattern. The incident seemed to happen when we were alone, when the house was quiet. And always, they came after we had laughed. Not at the notebook or the cabin, but just laughed. A joke with a friend. a moment of shared joy. It was as if our happiness was a trigger. The silent friend didn't like it when we were happy. He didn't like it when we laughed. The words from the torn page echoed in my mind. The horror wasn't just physical. It was a psychological trap designed to isolate us and drain our joy. The climax of this phase of the haunting came one night when Nate, the bravest among us, was finally cornered. He was alone at home, playing video games, trying to get his mind off of everything. He told us later that he heard the low whisper behind him and instinctively turned, but there was nothing. A moment later, he heard a loud, frantic banging coming from inside his closet. He yelled, "Go away!" And a cold, chilling voice, a voice that sounded like every one of his friends whispering at once, responded from inside the closet, "You should have stayed silent." Nate panicked and threw the door open. The closet was empty, but on the wall, someone had scrawled a single word in what looked like mud. Found. That was the breaking point. The fear was no longer a shadow, a whisper, or a prank. It was real, and it knew us. It was stalking us, one by one. Our brave facades had crumbled. The cabin and the notebook were not just places and objects. They were a bridge, and something had crossed it. We all realized the same terrible truth at the same time. Running was pointless. We couldn't outrun it. It wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about finding out what it was and why it chose us. The notebook was now our only lead. We had to go back to the source. The horror didn't end in the woods. It began there. We knew we had to return, not to escape, but to find answers. Because the last whisper I heard that night wasn't just my name. It was a single, chilling question. Do you want to play? The word found, scrawled on Nate's closet wall, was the final nail in the coffin of our disbelief. The next morning, we met at my place, our faces pale, our eyes rimmed with red. There were no jokes, no sarcastic comments, no arguments. We were a single, terrified unit. We laid out our options, all of them grim. Running was pointless. Hiding was impossible. The only thing we had was the notebook. It was our tormentor, but it was also our only lead. We have to go back to the source, Lily said, her voice unusually firm. We need to find out who that girl was. Who was she trying to warn us about? Mike nodded, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. We need to find out what happened to her family. Maybe there's something we're missing, something that could help us stop this. Our new mission was a grim one. We spent the next 2 days at the County Historical Society. The building smelled of old paper and dust, and the silence was just as unnerving as the one in the forest. We scoured ancient microfiche and yellowed newspaper clippings, searching for anything about a family who disappeared near our campsite. We sifted through decades of records, our hope flickering with every failed search. Then Nate found it, an article from the local paper dated 35 years ago. The headline was simple, yet chilling. Family of 3 vanishes from forest cabin. The story was short and clinical, reporting the disappearance of a couple and their 5-year-old daughter, a girl named Anna. The last person to see them was a local hunter who found the cabin empty, the door ajar. He'd reported it to the authorities, but no bodies were ever found. The case was closed as a probable relocation, but we knew better. We dug deeper, finding a few more details scattered through different archives. Anna's parents were eccentric, living off the grid, and had a reputation for dabbling in local folklore and spiritualism. The hunter who found the cabin mentioned finding a single, disturbing item left behind. A child's sketchbook filled with bizarre drawings. He'd shown it to the sheriff, but they dismissed it as the vivid imagination of a little girl. My blood ran cold. The clues were stacking up. We had found the original story. We had found the original item. We had, unwittingly, connected ourselves to a decades-old horror. "We need to find out what their rituals were," I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of dread. They weren't just living in a cabin. They were trying to contain something. The drawings. They're not just warnings. They're instructions. We spent another day at the Historical Society, digging deeper into the old town records. We finally found a faded, handwritten diary entry from a distant relative of Anna's family. The writing was elegant, but the content was frantic. It spoke of a powerful entity that lived in the woods, a being that fed on fear and happiness. The relative, a man named Bartholomew, wrote about how Anna's parents believed they had made a deal with this entity to keep their family safe, but the entity had its own rules. The most terrifying rule, Bartholomew wrote, was that it could not stand to be mocked. He spoke of a lullaby, a song of silence that had to be sung at midnight. He also mentioned that the creature could not be seen, only felt, and that its power grew every time a person was found. Our skin crawled as we read that. Found. The same word scrawled on Nate's closet wall. We had laughed at the drawings, and in doing so, we had broken their family's rule. We hadn't found the entity had found us. We stumbled out of the library, the setting sun casting long, twisted shadows. We were no longer scared of ghosts or monsters. We were terrified of an ancient entity that had been slumbering for 35 years, and we had just woken it up, and we now knew it had a name and a set of rules. We finally understood what had happened to Anna. She hadn't disappeared. She had been found. Her family's deal had failed, and in her final moments, she had frantically tried to warn future intruders. The torn page was a final act of desperation. It wasn't just a warning about her fate. It was a plea for us to not make the same mistake. The notebook, our cursed possession, suddenly felt like a map. The drawings weren't random. They were a timeline. We raced back to my place and grabbed the notebook. The drawings no longer looked childish. They looked like a desperate, coded diary. We needed to go back to the cabin, back to where the nightmare began. We were no longer running from it. We were going to confront it. But before we could, a new page appeared in the center of the book. A fresh page filled with a new drawing. It was a stick figure of a child in a bed, a black figure standing over it, and next to the bed, another small stick figure, a boy with a terrified look on his face. The drawing wasn't of Anna, it was of me, and below it was scrawled a single word in a child's handwriting: next. The word next was a death sentence. It was scrawled on a blank page in the middle of a 100-year-old notebook, but it felt more real than any tattoo. It meant that I was the next target, and our time was running out. Our fear had transformed into a cold, hard determination. We were no longer kids on an adventure. We were people fighting for our lives. We packed our bags with flashlights, ropes, and a small journal where we had copied the rules we'd found. This time, we were going back to the cabin not to run, but to end this. The second trip to the cabin was filled with a different kind of terror. The forest seemed to actively resist us. The trees grew closer, their branches feeling like skeletal arms reaching out. We heard our names whispered on the wind, not from each other, but from every direction at once. The silent friend, was all around us. It was a presence that pressed on our skin and filled our lungs with cold air. When we finally saw the cabin through the trees, it was different. It seemed to pulse with a faint, dark energy. The air around it was thicker, filled with a silence so profound it made our ears ring. We pushed open the familiar door, and a gust of stale air smelling of rot and old fear rushed out to greet us. The interior wasn't dusty anymore. It was clean. The floorboards, which had been covered in grime, looked freshly scrubbed. In the middle of the room, on a small wooden table, was a single lit candle. A candle we hadn't left there. "It knows we're here," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "It's waiting for us," Mike replied, his voice flat with dread. We gathered around the table, the small light of the candle casting long, dancing shadows on our faces. We pulled out the journal and read the final rule. To seal the silence, you must offer a truth. The diary entry from Bartholomew had been cryptic, but it had mentioned that the entity fed on deception and fear. To fight it, we had to be honest, completely and utterly honest. Our final task was to tell a truth to the entity, a secret we had never told anyone. "I'll go first," Nate said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm the one who led us here. I'm the one who laughed at the notebook. It wasn't just a joke. I wanted to believe in something like this. I wanted an adventure." He looked at me, a flicker of regret in his eyes. "The truth is, I was bored with my life, and I put all of us in danger just so I could feel something." The candle flickered, but held steady. "My turn," Mike said, his voice cracking. "I mocked the story because I was terrified. The truth is, I'm a coward. I've always been one. My confidence is a lie." Again, the candle held its flame. The air grew colder, and a low, guttural murmur filled the room, but the ritual was working. Then it was my turn. I looked at the candle, then at my friends. My truth felt like a betrayal. "The night after we found the notebook," I lied. I didn't hide it in my closet. I left it out, hoping to see what it would do. I wanted this to be real. I wanted to see if it would work, even if it meant risking our lives. The murmur grew louder, the sound of 1,000 whispers speaking a language of pure malice. The candle flame stretched high, then shrunk, but it didn't go out. "It's working," Lily cried out. But then we heard a sound we hadn't heard in days. It was a faint, mocking giggle coming from the doorway. We all looked up. In the darkness, we saw the faint outline of a child's silhouette. It was Anna. "You're almost there," the child's voice chirped. "But you missed a step. The final rule isn't a truth. It's a gift." The voice wasn't Anna's. It was the silent friend using her voice to deceive us. "One of you has to stay. You have to trade one life for the truth. One of you has to become the next silent friend." My heart stopped. We were caught in a trap. The rules we had followed were a diversion. The true price was a sacrifice. We looked at each other, the fear in our eyes returning with a new intensity. "No," Lily said, stepping forward. "It was my fault. I was the one who was scared from the beginning. Maybe if I hadn't been so afraid, we would have done this differently." "No," Nate yelled. "You're not doing this, Lily." But it was too late. The shadow of the silent friend appeared behind her, its long arms reaching out, its hollow eyes met mine. It wasn't a monster. It was a hungry void waiting to be filled. I closed my eyes, and I heard Lily's faint scream, followed by the snap of a twig. When I opened them, she was gone. The candle on the table sputtered and died, plunging the cabin into a sudden, perfect darkness. We were alone. We had survived, but at a terrible price. The silence that filled the cabin now was no longer threatening. It was empty. The silent friend had left. We rushed out, leaving the cabin behind, running through the forest in a desperate, silent retreat. We never spoke of Lily again. The months that followed were a waking nightmare. We tried to get on with our lives, but we were all different. Mike quit college and spent his days volunteering at a local church, as if trying to atone for something. Nate left town, and I heard he now works as a park ranger, spending his life in the woods, as if trying to understand the thing he once laughed at. As for me, I'm the one who tells the stories. I found this channel and decided to share our experience, hoping that by telling the story, I could finally be free of it. But I know the truth. I will never be free. The candle in the cabin went out, but the hunger of the silent friend remains. Every time you listen to a story like this, every time you laugh at a legend, you're opening a door. And one day, you might just find that you're not alone. I'm sitting here in my room, the lights on, the laptop open, but I can't shake the feeling. Just moments ago, I heard a faint whisper. It was almost silent, just a breath of air. But I know what it said. It was just a single word. Next.